Whenever I discuss anime adaptations on my channel, it usually ends up being pretty negative because quite frankly, a lot of them suck. Well, I think it's time for a palate cleanse, don't you? In this video, I'm going to show you something incredible. 1993's Rance Sabaku no Guardian. And sorry if I sound a little off today. I'm getting over a bad cold and I'm still dealing with a bit of stubborn congestion. Regular viewers of my channel will know that I'm a fan of Rance, the flagship series of Japanese adult game developer Alisoft. It's a great blend of comedy and genuine storytelling, with many of the titles also having excellent gameplay on top of that. And of course, it's all built on the foundation of the titular protagonist, who's a hilarious narcissistic jerk who has a propensity for struggle snuggling. Rance is truly an experience and one that I'd highly recommend. The games, not the struggle snuggling, especially considering the retro titles are all free. Well, in December of 1993, Animate released a two-part ecchi OVA known as Rance Sabaku no Guardian, which is an original non-canon story featuring Rance and his faithful companion Syl going on an adventure in the desert city of Oasis. Now, one of the interesting things about this OVA is that when it was made, the Rance games had only gotten up to Rance 4, so it's based on the retro timeline. Okay, brief bit of history for those who may be new to the channel. Rance 1 was a fantasy adventure parody game released in 1989, and despite a few growing pains, it became the signature series for Alisoft. However, in the mid-90s, Alisoft was struggling and it looked like they were going to go bankrupt. So they decided to give Rance a conclusion. Even though his story still really needed some time to cook, it was better than no ending at all. That game released in 1996 as Kijiko Rance, and it is easily the best game up to that point. It's genuinely one of the best grand strategy games of its era, and it sold so well that it most likely saved the company. Years later, they retconned Kijiko Rance so they could continue the story from where they would have left off. And eventually, they remade the first 3 games in the series and decided to split the series into 2 timelines. There's the original retro games, capping off with Kijiko Rance, and then there's the remakes followed by the modern games. Aside from the obvious fact that they both branch off, they do differ in a few subtle ways. Notably, Rance is actually a bit nicer and more complex in the modern canon. This is relevant here because Sabaku no Guardian was made when only the retro timeline existed, so it's based off that version of Rance. In addition, at that point, Rance hadn't yet had all that much serious character and story development. While Rance 3 and 4 did start to do a lot with the plot, world building, and character arcs, Rance 1 and 2 were pretty much one-shots. Functionally, they were erotic action sitcoms. Sabaku no Guardian takes that same approach. It's basically a comedic one-shot adventure with none of the deeper story stuff we've all come to expect from Rance. But goddamn, it really does capture the comic spirit of Rance in ways that genuinely impressed me. And I'd like to do a quick overview of it in the hopes that I can get some of you to watch it. Sabaku no Guardian really leans into the parody elements of Rance. After all, it was originally conceptualized as a spoof of fantasy RPGs. However, one thing I really like about how it goes about it is that pretty much everything aside from Rance and Syl is played pretty straight. It's not really a crazy ass parody world like the Rance games, but rather a normal-ish dark fantasy world with a standard dark fantasy storyline, and Rance is basically a live grenade coming in to fuck with it all. I mean, the opening scene starts out in that fantasy style of a mysterious traveling warrior rescuing a woman from a band of ne'er-do-wells, only to then order his slave to loot their bodies as he snuggles the woman he just rescued from exactly that fate. And of course, the slave Syl gets upset. Not because of the ethical concerns, but because he's doing it with another girl again. Interestingly, that's actually the only time Rance commits a struggle snuggle in the OVA. His other copulations are entirely consensual. Okay, so I'm not going to go over the entire story beat for beat like I might normally, and I have a good reason for that. As mentioned before, Sabaku no Guardian is at its core an action sitcom. The plot really only serves 2 purposes: to give Rance a reason to go out and do things, and to facilitate a funny tonal contrast between a pretty disturbing story and the hilarious bullshit of Rance and Syl. So the actual story itself doesn't really matter all that much, and I'd rather let you guys experience it for yourself. But the basics are that Rance and Syl make their way to Oasis, where the leader reveals that the town is often raided by bandits led by a woman known as Green Scorpion, who weirdly enough has a banner with a red scorpion. So Rance is hired to deal with the situation. I know I already briefly mentioned this earlier, but I really do have to emphasize how Sabaku no Guardian takes itself pretty seriously, except for when Rance is there, which is in contrast to the games where they do have their serious and dark moments, but the world overall is still kind of ridiculous and funny. But Sabaku no Guardian is actually kind of depressing in its setting. Green Scorpion is involved in these intense sexual occult-esque rituals hell-bent on destroying Oasis, while the leader of Oasis is suffering from her own residual trauma that's actually pretty sad when you learn about it. I love this because it does an excellent job of amplifying the comedic elements because they're held up next to these extremely serious plot beats. Without getting into specifics because I don't want to spoil it for you, there's a big climactic ending sequence that ties together all the major plot elements and provides a lot of bittersweet closure only for Rance to do Rance things, trivializing everything that just happened before proceeding to bang Syl. And I think this combos very well with something that I feel is a strength of the animation medium when compared to the games. There are a lot of visual and animation gags throughout the OVA, and it was a real treat. The games are done with sprites and CGs, so while there is some visual humor there, it doesn't quite compare to Rance's eyes bugging out of his head Looney Tunes style at a pair of tits, or the hilarious way Rance and Syl's faces will distort to highlight their emotions, or even scenes that focus entirely on visual humor, such as Rance trying to infiltrate the enemy fortress by trying on different disguises, or one scene where Syl is being played like an instrument by a vine monster. I can't show that one on YouTube, but I fucking lost it when I saw it for myself. Sabaku no Guardian manages to bring the manic energy of Rance into a cartoon, and it's pretty much exactly what I want from a one-shot Rance OVA. Now I do have to acknowledge that the OVA does take some liberties with the source material. While we do have our iconic duo of Rance and Syl at the helm, it's very clear that this is not something that fits in with the actual Rance canon. And while that didn't bother me very much, I can imagine it being disappointing for some. For starters, Rance and Syl are actually the only characters from the games to make it into the adaptation. While I would argue that they're the two best characters, a big draw of the games is how great the overall cast is. There's no Maria, Shizuka, Leah, Kanami, nothing. And their presence was definitely missed because they're not only amazing characters, but they add so much to the overall dynamic. Rance will often laugh and not do the gahaha. There are also world-building inconsistencies, with the biggest example being that Hennies are not immune to magic, so Syl actually fucks a bunch of them up. Though that does lead to a hilarious moment where she flips them off. But that's actually another thing. Syl is basically a completely different character. She's not the capable, caring sweetheart from the games. In the OVA, she's basically a complete ditz who constantly fangirls over Rance like some desperate groupie. Don't get me wrong, this version of her is adorable and funny, but it's just not the Syl I've come to really appreciate as a character. And lastly, I do have to acknowledge that Sabaku no Guardian really is more of an action sitcom than the comedy epic that we got with the games. And granted, they only had the first few games to reference, but if you're expecting the intense character and plot stuff that happened from Rance 3 onwards, you're going to be disappointed. Instead, you should think of it more like Rance 1 or 2, except that none of the side characters actually matter. Again, it's a one-shot story that's more meant to be funny than anything else. And for reasons I won't spoil, literally none of what happened in the OVA ends up mattering in the grand scheme of things. It's funny, but there's not all that much to really sink your teeth into. But it does do the comedy well. It's a different take on Rance, but one that I was thoroughly enjoying from start to finish. It's not something I'd put on the same level as the games, but I had a great time watching, and I'm keeping a copy handy, because I just know there'll come a time when I want to give it a rewatch. The negatives that I talk about in this video are there, but the sheer fun factor of Sabaku no Guardian means that it won't really hit you until you stop to think about it. In the moment, this is a great time, and despite the liberties it took, it was clearly made with love for the source material, and I can respect that. So yes, it gets my recommendation. I can't give you a link since even though it's not a hardcore hentai, it's still spicy enough to run afoul of YouTube's TOS. But if you search Sabaku no Guardian, you can find it easily enough. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my members, especially my $10 member Bulk Squat Thrust. Members got this video early, so if you'd like to join them, click the join button below for as little as $1 a month. Do make sure to like the video for the algorithm and subscribe for more. And also, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I do plan to watch and make a video on the Rance 01 adaptation as well in the near future, so look forward to that. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time, hopefully healthier. Play the electro swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more.